The stagecoach lurched violently to one side as the wheel snapped clean off, sending Zelda Sinclair tumbling against the wooden interior with enough force to knock the breath from her lungs. And when she finally managed to push open the door and stumble onto the scorching Arizona desert sand, she realized she was utterly alone on the road to Kingman with nothing but her trunk, her fading hope, and the relentless sun beating down on her black mourning dress. It was June of 1878, and Zelda had traveled all the way from Boston to take up a teaching position in the small mining town, fleeing the suffocating memories of her father's recent death and the debts he'd left behind. She was 22 years old, educated proper, and completely unprepared for the harsh reality of the Arizona territory. The driver had been thrown clear when the wheel broke, landing hard on the packed earth. She rushed to his side, her heart hammering as she knelt beside him. "Sir, please, are you hurt badly?" she asked, her Boston accent crisp even in her panic. The older man groaned, clutching his arm. "Shoulders busted, miss, and my leg ain't right neither. You're going to have to ride one of the horses into town for help." Zelda looked at the two horses still hitched to the broken stagecoach, then back at the driver. "I've never ridden a horse in my life." "Then you best learn quick, because we're about 10 miles from Kingman and this sun will cook us both by nightfall." He grimaced in pain. "Unhitch the bay mare." "She's calmer. Just hold on and point her toward town. She knows the way." With trembling hands, Zelda managed to free the mare from the harness, though it took her nearly 20 minutes to figure out the buckles and straps. The horse stood patiently, seeming to understand the urgency. But when Zelda tried to mount, her long skirts and corset made it impossible to swing her leg over the saddle. "You'll have to hitch your skirts up, miss. Modesty won't matter if you're dead," the driver said through gritted teeth. Face burning with embarrassment despite their dire situation, Zelda gathered her skirts and petticoats, tying them in an ungainly knot that exposed her ankles and calves. She managed to get one foot in the stirrup, then hauled herself up with all her strength. The saddle felt enormous and unstable beneath her. She'd barely settled when the mare started walking, and Zelda grabbed the saddle horn with both hands, her heart in her throat. "Follow the road, miss, and hurry." The mare seemed to sense Zelda's inexperience and moved at a steady walk rather than the gallop Zelda knew they needed. Every few minutes, she tried to urge the horse faster, but her efforts only resulted in a brief trot that bounced her so hard she thought her teeth would rattle loose. After an hour of this torture, her hands were blistered, her legs ached from gripping the saddle, and she was certain she'd made no progress at all. That's when she saw the dust cloud rising in the distance, moving toward her along the road. Hope surged in her chest. As the cloud drew closer, she could make out a rider, then the details emerged. A tall man on a paint horse, wearing dusty leather chaps and a dark hat pulled low against the sun. He rode with an easy confidence that made Zelda's clumsy attempts at horsemanship seem even more pathetic. When he was close enough, he slowed his horse and pulled up beside her. Zelda got her first clear look at him and felt something unexpected flutter in her stomach. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and sharp blue eyes that studied her with concern. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw and dark hair curled slightly beneath his hat. Dust covered his clothes, and he wore a worn Colt revolver on his hip. "Madam, you look like you've had some trouble," he said, his voice a low drawl that carried easily over the desert silence. "The stagecoach lost a wheel about 2 hours back," Zelda said, her voice cracking. "The driver is injured badly. He needs help immediately." The cowboy's expression turned serious. "How far back?" "I don't know. I've been riding for over an hour, but I'm not skilled at this." "Perhaps 5 or 6 miles," Without hesitation, he wheeled his horse around. "Follow me back. We'll get to him faster together." He glanced at her hands on the saddle horn and seemed to understand her predicament. "Just hold on and let your horse follow mine. She'll keep pace." They started back at a much faster clip than Zelda had managed alone, and she clung to the saddle for dear life, bouncing and jolting with every stride. The cowboy looked back frequently to check on her, occasionally slowing when he saw her struggling. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 20 minutes, they reached the broken stagecoach. The driver was worse than before, his face pale and sweating despite the heat. The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion and knelt beside him, examining his injuries with practiced efficiency. "I'm Flynn Morrison," he said as he worked. "I've got some medical knowledge from my time with the cavalry. This shoulder's dislocated and your leg's broken clean through. I can set the shoulder now, but the leg needs a doctor." "Do what you have to," the driver said weakly. Zelda climbed down from her horse, her legs nearly buckling when they hit the ground. She steadied herself against the mare and watched as Flynn set to work. He moved with calm competence, explaining each step to the driver before he did it. When he popped the shoulder back into place, the driver let out a strangled cry that made Zelda flinch, but Flynn's hands remained steady. "Miss, I need you to tear some fabric from your petticoats," Flynn said without looking up. "We need to splint his leg for transport." Zelda didn't hesitate. She ripped several long strips from her underlayers, grateful for something useful to do. Flynn used the fabric along with pieces of wood from the broken wheel to create a makeshift splint, securing it with the practiced hands of someone who'd done this before. "We need to get him to town," Flynn said, standing and wiping his hands on his pants. "But we can't put him on a horse in this condition. I'll have to ride to my ranch and get a wagon. It's only about 3 miles north of here." "How long will that take?" Zelda asked, looking at the driver's pale face. "An hour, maybe less, but I can't leave you both here unprotected." He pulled his revolver from its holster and held it out to her. "Do you know how to use this?" Zelda stared at the weapon. "Absolutely not. It's simple. Point it at anything that threatens you and pull the trigger, but only if you absolutely have to." When she didn't take it, he added gently, "Madam, this is wild country. There's mountain lions, rattlesnakes, and worse. I wouldn't offer if it wasn't necessary." With shaking hands, Zelda took the revolver. It was heavier than she'd expected, cold and deadly in her palm. Flynn showed her the basics: how to hold it, how to aim, how to cock the hammer. His hands were rough with calluses but surprisingly gentle as he guided her fingers into position. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly, his blue eyes meeting hers. "Zelda. Zelda Sinclair." "Well, Miss Sinclair, I'll be back as fast as I can. Keep this man comfortable and stay alert." He mounted his horse in one smooth motion, then paused. "You're doing real well for someone not used to this country. Most Eastern folks would have panicked by now." Before she could respond, he urged his horse into a gallop and disappeared down the road in a cloud of dust, heading north. Zelda stood there with the heavy revolver in her hand, suddenly aware of how vast and empty the desert was around them. The only sounds were the driver's labored breathing, the horses shifting their weight, and the whisper of wind across the sand. She moved into the shade of the broken stagecoach and sat beside the driver, placing the gun carefully on her lap. The minutes crawled by. She tried to make conversation with the driver, but he was fading in and out of consciousness. She gave him water from the canteen Flynn had left behind, careful not to waste any in the oppressive heat. 30 minutes passed. Then 40. Zelda's mind wandered to the cowboy who'd come to their aid, Flynn Morrison. There was something about him that had made her feel safe, despite the dire circumstances. A quiet strength that seemed as natural as breathing. She'd known plenty of men in Boston, educated gentlemen who courted her with proper manners and scripted charm. But none of them had made her feel the way she'd felt when Flynn had looked at her with those steady blue eyes. She shook her head at her own foolishness. This was hardly the time for such thoughts. A sound made her tense. At first she thought it was the wind, but then she heard it again, a low rumble that didn't belong in the desert silence. She stood slowly, her hand going to the revolver. The driver stirred, his eyes opening. "What is it?" He mumbled, "I don't know." Then she saw them, 3 riders approaching from the east, moving at an easy lope. As they drew closer, Zelda felt her stomach tighten with fear. These weren't friendly ranchers or helpful travelers. Even from a distance, she could sense the menace in the way they rode, spread out like hunters circling prey. They pulled up about 20 yards away, and Zelda got her first good look at them. Rough men, all 3 with hard eyes and harder expressions. The one in the middle had a scar running from his eye to his chin, and he grinned when he saw her standing there with the revolver. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Scar said, dismounting slowly. "Looks like somebody had an accident." "We've had trouble with the stage coach," Zelda said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Help is coming." "Is that right?" The man took a few steps closer. "Looks to me like you're all alone out here. That's mighty dangerous for a lady." "I said help is coming. You should ride on." The other 2 men dismounted now, and they spread out, flanking her. Zelda raised the revolver, her hands shaking so badly she could barely keep it level. "Now don't do anything stupid, sweetheart," Scar said, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "You don't even know how to hold that thing properly. Why don't you just put it down and we can have a nice friendly conversation about what's in that trunk of yours?" "Stay back," Zelda said, but her voice cracked. Scar took another step. "I don't think you have the nerve to pull that trigger." He was right, and they both knew it. Zelda had never hurt anyone in her life, and despite the lessons Flynn had given her, she couldn't imagine actually shooting another person. Her finger trembled on the trigger. The sound of hoofbeats made everyone freeze. Zelda felt a surge of hope as she recognized the paint horse galloping toward them. Flynn bent low over its neck, pushing the animal to its limits. He had a rifle in his hand, and even before he pulled up, he was swinging it into position. "Step away from the lady," Flynn's voice cut across the desert, hard as iron. Scar turned, his expression shifting from predatory to calculating. "This ain't your business, friend. I'm making it my business." Flynn dismounted but kept the rifle trained on the 3 men. "Miss Sinclair, come over here." Zelda didn't hesitate. She hurried to Flynn's side, still clutching the revolver. Up close, she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes never left the 3 men. "We were just offering to help," Scar said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Help isn't needed. Mount up and ride out." For a long moment, nobody moved. Zelda could feel the violence hanging in the air like the heat shimmer off the sand. Then Scar shrugged and turned back to his horse. "No need for trouble. We'll be on our way." The 3 men mounted and rode off, but not before Scar looked back at Zelda with a grin that made her skin crawl. "See you around, sweetheart." Flynn kept the rifle up until they were out of sight, then let out a long breath. "Are you all right?" "Yes, thanks to you." Zelda realized she was still shaking. "I couldn't have shot them. They knew it." "Good," Flynn said, surprising her. "That means you're not a killer. Those men were drifters, probably looking to rob the stage. They won't come back now that they know someone's watching." He took his revolver back and holstered it. "The wagon's coming with 2 of my ranch hands. They're about 10 minutes behind me. I rode ahead when I heard them coming this way." "You heard them from that distance. I grew up in this country. You learn to pay attention to everything." He studied her face. "You did real well, Miss Sinclair. Most people would have frozen up completely." "I felt frozen," she admitted. But you didn't run and you stood your ground. That takes courage." The wagon arrived as promised, driven by two leathery cowboys who worked for Flynn. They loaded the injured driver onto a bed of hay in the back with gentle efficiency, then secured Zelda's trunk. Flynn insisted she ride in the wagon with the driver while he and his men rode alongside. The journey to Kingman took nearly 2 hours. Zelda spent the time tending to the driver and trying not to think about what might have happened if Flynn hadn't arrived when he did. When they finally rolled into town, the sun was setting, painting the dusty streets in shades of gold and crimson. Kingman was larger than Zelda had expected, with a main street lined with wooden buildings, a proper hotel, several saloons, a general store, and what looked like a church at the far end. Flynn directed the wagon to a small house with a doctor's shingle hanging outside. A tired-looking man in his 50s came out, took one look at the driver, and immediately set to work. "You'll need a place to stay," Flynn said to Zelda as they stood outside the doctor's office. "The hotel's decent enough. I'll have my men take your trunk over." "I should pay you for your help," Zelda said, though she wasn't sure how much money she had left after the journey. "No need for that. Anyone would have done the same." "I don't think that's true. Not everyone would have ridden to help a stranger." Flynn shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable with the praise. "You heading to Kingman for a reason or just passing through?" "I'm the new school teacher. I was supposed to arrive 3 days ago, but there were delays in Santa Fe." His eyebrows rose slightly. "School teacher. We've been waiting for someone to take that position for months. The last teacher left to get married, and the kids have been running half wild ever since. Then I'd better get settled quickly. Is there a school board I should meet with?" "That would be Mayor Thornton. He owns the Mercantile." "I'll take you there tomorrow morning if you like." "You've done more than enough already, Mr. Morrison. I can't keep imposing on your time." "It's no imposition." He met her eyes, and Zelda felt that same flutter in her stomach as before. "Besides, I want to make sure you're settled safely. This town's generally peaceful, but a woman alone needs to know who she can trust." They arranged to meet at the hotel at 9 the next morning, and then Flynn tipped his hat and rode off with his ranch hands. Zelda checked into the hotel, a modest establishment with clean sheets and a wash basin, and collapsed onto the bed fully clothed. Her body ached from the long hours on horseback, her hands were blistered, and her dress was ruined beyond repair, but she was alive and safe. And tomorrow she would begin the life she'd traveled across the country to find. She fell asleep thinking about blue eyes and a steady voice cutting through the desert heat. The next morning, Zelda woke before dawn, her body protesting every movement. She washed as best she could with the cold water in the basin, and dressed in one of her few remaining clean dresses, a simple gray cotton that was far too hot for the Arizona climate, but appropriate for meeting the mayor. She pinned her dark hair back in a severe bun and studied her reflection in the small mirror. She looked pale and tired, with dark circles under her eyes, but there was a determination in her expression that hadn't been there in Boston. She ate breakfast in the hotel dining room, a simple meal of eggs and bread that cost more than she'd expected, then waited in the lobby. At precisely 9 o'clock, Flynn appeared, and Zelda felt her breath catch slightly. In the morning light, cleaned up and freshly shaved, he was even more striking than she'd remembered. He wore clean pants and a pressed shirt, his dark hair still damp from washing, and when he smiled at her, she felt warmth spread through her chest. "Morning, Miss Sinclair. I hope you rested well." As well as could be expected after yesterday's excitement. She gathered her reticule and gloves. "Thank you again for meeting me. I'm sure you have work to attend to. Ranch can spare me for a morning. Besides, I told Mayor Thornton I'd bring you by. He's eager to meet you." They walked down the main street together, and Zelda was acutely aware of the stares they drew from the townspeople. A proper lady and a cowboy made an unusual pair, she supposed. Flynn seemed oblivious to the attention, nodding greetings to people as they passed. "How long have you lived here?" Zelda asked. "Born in Texas, came out here about 5 years ago, bought a small ranch north of town and built it up. Got about 200 head of cattle now, some horses. It's a good life." "You mentioned you were in the cavalry." "For a spell, yeah. Served for 3 years after the war ended. Saw enough fighting to last me a lifetime." His expression grew distant. "That's part of why I came out here, wanted some peace and quiet. And instead you spend your time rescuing stranded schoolteachers." He glanced at her, and she saw a hint of amusement in his eyes. "I don't mind that kind of excitement." The Mercantile was a large building stocked with everything from farm equipment to fine fabrics. Mayor Thornton stood behind the counter, a portly man with mutton-chop whiskers and a vest stretched tight across his belly. His face lit up when he saw them enter. "Miss Sinclair, at last. We heard about your troubles yesterday. Terrible business, terrible. But Flynn here is the best man in the territory, so you were in good hands." He came around the counter, pumping her hand enthusiastically. "We're so pleased to have a teacher again. The children are in desperate need of education." "I'm eager to begin, Mayor Thornton. When might I see the schoolhouse?" "Right away, right away. It's just down the street. Flynn, you'll join us, won't you?" The schoolhouse was a simple wooden structure with rows of benches and a large chalkboard at the front. It was dusty and clearly hadn't been used in months, but Zelda could see the potential. There were primers and slates stacked in the corner, a globe that had seen better days, and even a small library of books. "You'll have about 20 students, ages 6 to 14, the mayor explained. "We can't pay much, I'm afraid." $25 a month and use of the small cottage behind the building. It's not fancy, but it's clean. $25 was barely enough to live on, but Zelda had expected as much. Teaching positions in frontier towns were never well paid. "That will be fine. When should I start?" "Monday next, if that suits you. That gives you a few days to settle in and prepare." After the mayor left, Flynn helped Zelda carry her trunk from the hotel to the cottage. It was indeed small, just 2 rooms with a fireplace, a narrow bed, a table and 2 chairs, and some basic kitchen supplies. But after living in her father's crowded boarding house in Boston, it felt like a palace to have space that was entirely her own. "I'll bring some firewood by tomorrow," Flynn said, setting her trunk down carefully. "Nights get cold here, even in summer." "You don't have to keep helping me, Mr. Morrison. You've already done so much. It's Flynn. And I know I don't have to." He met her eyes. "I want to." There was something in the way he said it that made Zelda's heart beat faster. She should send him away, maintain proper distance, be the respectable teacher this town expected. But when she looked at him, standing in the doorway with dust motes dancing in the sunlight around him, she found she didn't want him to leave. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked. "I saw a pot in the kitchen, and I'm sure I can manage to heat water." Flynn smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "I'd like that very much." They spent the next hour sitting at the small table, drinking terrible coffee that Zelda had indeed managed to make over the fireplace, talking about everything and nothing. Flynn told her about his ranch, about the challenges of raising cattle in the desert, about his 2 horses and the dog that followed him everywhere. Zelda found herself telling him about Boston, about her father's death, about the suffocating expectations of society women and her desperate need to escape. "You miss it?" Flynn asked. "The city, I mean. The culture and refinement." Zelda considered the question. "I miss the libraries. And the ocean. But I don't miss the rest. Everyone there knew exactly what I should be doing with my life, and none of it involved what I wanted. What do you want? I want to matter. I want to teach children who really need education, not wealthy girls learning to play piano and speak French. I want to build something real. She paused. What about you? What do you want? Flynn was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. I want what I have. The ranch, the horses, some peace. But lately I've been thinking it might be nice to share it with someone. Gets lonely out there sometimes. The air between them felt charged with possibility. Zelda knew she should change the subject, steer the conversation back to safer territory, but she couldn't seem to find the words. I should get back, Flynn said finally, standing. Got a fence that needs mending before nightfall, but I'll bring that firewood tomorrow if that's all right. It's all right, Zelda said softly. At the door, he paused and looked back at her. I'm glad you came to Kingman, Miss Sinclair, even if it was a rough journey getting here. Zelda, she said. You can call me Zelda. Zelda. He said her name like he was tasting it, rolling it around to see how it fit. Then he tipped his hat and was gone, leaving her standing in the empty cottage with a smile on her face. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Flynn brought firewood as promised, along with fresh milk and eggs from his ranch. Zelda cleaned the schoolhouse from top to bottom, organized the books, and prepared lessons for students she hadn't yet met. The townspeople stopped by to introduce themselves, sizing up the new teacher with curiosity and cautious welcome. On Saturday, Flynn invited Zelda to visit his ranch, assuring her it was proper as his housekeeper would be there as chaperone. Zelda accepted, eager to see more of the country beyond Kingman. They rode out early in the morning, Zelda managing much better on horseback after Flynn spent an hour teaching her the basics of riding. He was a patient teacher, never making her feel foolish for her mistakes, showing her how to communicate with the horse through subtle shifts of weight and pressure. The ranch was beautiful in a stark, desert way. The house was modest but well built, with a wide porch that overlooked miles of open range. Cattle grazed in the distance, and horses moved in a corral near the barn. A black and white dog bounded up to greet them, tail wagging furiously. This is Scout, Flynn said, scratching the dog behind the ears. Best cattle dog in the territory. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, was a middle-aged Chinese woman with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She served them lunch on the porch, a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold chicken, then discreetly disappeared back inside. How did you end up with a Chinese housekeeper in the middle of Arizona? Zelda asked, genuinely curious. She was working in a laundry in town, barely making enough to survive. Her husband died in a mining accident, and the white folks weren't too keen on doing business with her. Flynn's expression darkened. This country likes to talk about freedom and opportunity, but it sure doesn't extend that to everyone. I figured she deserved a fair chance, and I needed help around the house. Works out for both of us. Zelda felt something warm bloom in her chest. That's very decent of you. It's just common sense. Mrs. Chen works harder than anyone I know, and she's a damn fine cook. He caught himself. Pardon my language. I've heard worse. Zelda smiled. My father worked on the docks before he took sick. The men there didn't exactly watch their tongues around his daughter. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the desert shimmer in the heat. Zelda felt more at ease than she had in months, maybe years. There was something about Flynn's presence that made her feel safe to be herself, without pretense or performance. Can I ask you something? Flynn said suddenly. Of course. Why did you really leave Boston? I don't mean to pry, but it seems like there's more to the story than needing a change. Zelda took a deep breath. She hadn't told anyone the full truth, but something about Flynn made her want to be honest. My father borrowed money from some men who weren't patient about repayment. When he died, they came to me expecting I'd cover his debts. I couldn't, obviously, so they suggested other ways I might work off what was owed. Flynn's jaw tightened. They threatened you. They made it clear I had limited options. So I found this teaching position and left in the middle of the night with whatever I could carry. I'm hoping the distance is enough that they won't bother coming after me, but I can't be sure. How much does he owe? $200. Might as well be $2,000 for all my ability to pay it. Flynn was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "If they come looking, you let me know. You're not alone out here, Zelda." The way he said her name with such conviction and care made her eyes sting with sudden tears. "You barely know me." "I know enough." He turned to face her fully. "I know you're brave enough to cross the country alone. I know you stood your ground when those drifters threatened you. I know you care about teaching children who need it. That's more than enough." Zelda found herself leaning closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. Flynn's hand came up to gently cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, and she wasn't sure what she'd do if he did. But then Mrs. Chen appeared on the porch with a pitcher of water, and they sprang apart like guilty teenagers. The ride back to town was quiet but not uncomfortable. Something had shifted between them, an understanding that went beyond words. When Flynn helped Zelda down from her horse outside the cottage, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "I'll see you tomorrow at church," he asked. "I'll be there." Sunday morning found Zelda dressed in her best dress, walking to the white church at the end of Main Street. The interior was simple but clean, with wooden pews and sunlight streaming through plain glass windows. She took a seat near the back, aware of the curious glances from other parishioners. Flynn arrived just as the service was starting, sliding into the pew beside her. His presence was solid and reassuring, and Zelda found herself relaxing despite her nervousness about meeting so many new people at once. The Reverend was a stern-looking man who preached about righteousness and sin in equal measure. Zelda tried to pay attention, but she was acutely aware of Flynn beside her, of the way their arms almost touched on the shared armrest, of the way he smelled like leather and sage. After the service, she was introduced to what felt like half the town. There was Mrs. Patterson, a sharp-eyed woman who ran the boarding house. Tom and Sarah Wheeler, who owned a small farm outside town and had 3 children who would be in Zelda's class. The blacksmith, a giant of a man named Pete who had surprisingly gentle eyes. The saloon owner, a woman named Kate who wore trousers and carried a derringer in her boot, and who sized up Zelda like she was looking at a potential rival. "So you're the teacher," Kate said, not unkindly. "Got your work cut out for you. These kids are wild as coyotes." "I've dealt with difficult students before," Zelda said, though she wasn't sure that was entirely true. Kate glanced at Flynn, then back at Zelda, and something knowing passed across her face. "I'm sure you'll do just fine. And if you need anything, my door's always open. Women have to look out for each other in this country." Over the next week, Zelda threw herself into preparing for her first day of school. She organized the classroom, met with parents, and tried to learn as much as she could about each student before they arrived. Flynn stopped by every evening after work, ostensibly to check that everything was all right, but really just to talk. They fell into an easy routine, sitting on her small porch as the sun set, sharing stories and dreams. Zelda learned that Flynn had lost his parents young, raised by an uncle who taught him ranching but not much else. That he joined the army at 18, looking for purpose, and found only violence. That he'd saved every penny from his service to buy the ranch, determined to build something that was entirely his own. that he'd been engaged once back in Texas, but the girl had broken it off when she realized what frontier life would actually be like. "Did you love her?" Zelda asked, surprised by her own boldness. Flynn considered the question. "I thought I did at the time. But looking back, I think I loved the idea of her more than the reality. She was pretty and sweet, and I figured that was enough, but we never talked like this, never really knew each other beyond the surface." "What do you want in a partner, then? Someone real. Someone who doesn't need everything to be perfect. Someone brave enough to build a life in hard country." He looked at her. "What about you? Ever been in love?" "No. I had suitors in Boston, but they were interested in what I represented, not who I actually was. My father had pretensions about our social status, and these men saw me as a way to appear respectable while living off his supposed connections." She laughed bitterly. "They disappeared quick enough when they learned we were drowning in debt. Then they were fools." The simple statement, delivered with complete sincerity, made Zelda's throat tight with emotion. "You can't possibly know that." "Can I? I've spent more time with you in the past week than I've spent with anyone in years, and I haven't once been bored or wished I was elsewhere." "That means something." Before Zelda could respond, they heard shouting from down the street. Flynn was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the gun he always wore. They hurried toward the noise and found a crowd gathering outside the saloon. At the center of it were two men, circling each other with fists raised, blood already streaming from split lips and broken noses. "That's Ben Carter and Jack Holmes," Flynn said quietly. "They've got a claim dispute that's been brewing for months. Best stay back." But even as he said it, one of the men pulled a knife, and the tenor of the fight changed instantly. Women screamed and men surged forward to intervene. Flynn moved without thinking, stepping between the two fighters just as the knife came down. Zelda's scream was lost in the chaos. Flynn caught the knife wielder's wrist, twisting hard until the blade clattered to the ground. He shoved both men apart with enough force to send them stumbling. "That's enough," Flynn said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "You want to kill each other over a patch of dirt. You do it outside town where the kids don't have to watch." The sheriff arrived then, a weathered man named Cooper who seemed perpetually tired. He hauled both fighters off toward the jail, lecturing them the whole way. The crowd dispersed slowly, talking in excited voices about the near tragedy. Zelda found she was shaking. "You could have been stabbed, but I wasn't." Flynn examined his hands, checking for injury. "Just another day in Kingman." "Does this happen often? Often enough?" "Mining claims make men crazy. They'll kill each other over a few feet of rock that might have silver in it." He looked at her carefully. "Is this going to be a problem? The violence, I mean. I know you're used to civilization." "I'm more resilient than I look," Zelda said, though her voice shook slightly. "And I'm not going anywhere." Something in Flynn's expression softened. "Good. That's real good." Monday morning arrived with bright sunshine and Zelda's stomach in knots. She arrived at the schoolhouse early, writing the day's lessons on the chalkboard in her careful script. At 8 o'clock, children started arriving in clusters, eyeing her with curiosity and suspicion. They ranged from tiny 6-year-olds to gangly teenagers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Good morning," Zelda said, projecting confidence she didn't feel. "I'm Miss Sinclair, your new teacher. Please find a seat and we'll begin." The first day was chaos. The younger children were sweet but unfocused. The middle students tested every boundary and the older ones sat in sullen silence. By noon, Zelda's voice was hoarse and her nerves were frayed. But she pushed through, refusing to let them see her doubt. One boy in particular, a 13-year-old named Danny Wheeler, seemed determined to make her life difficult. He talked constantly, threw spitballs, and deliberately gave wrong answers when called upon. By the end of the day, Zelda was ready to quit, but the next morning she came back. And the next. Slowly, grudgingly, the students began to settle. She learned their names, their strengths, their struggles. Little Emma Carter could barely read but drew beautiful pictures. Tommy Hernandez was brilliant at arithmetic, but terrified to speak in front of the class. And Danny Wheeler, for all his bluster, was actually quite bright when he focused. Flynn continued to visit every evening, and Zelda found herself looking forward to those moments more than anything else in her day. One evening, nearly 3 weeks after school had started, he brought a package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" Zelda asked. "Open it." Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal, the pages thick and creamy. "Flynn, this is too much. I was in Prescott last week and saw it in a shop. Thought you might like somewhere to write down your thoughts about teaching, or whatever else you want to write about." Zelda ran her fingers over the smooth leather. "It's beautiful, thank you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Then Flynn said, "Can I ask you something, always? Would you go riding with me on Saturday? There's a place I want to show you up in the hills. We'd be gone most of the day." Zelda knew she should say no. A full day alone with a man, even one as honorable as Flynn, would start tongues wagging all over town. But when she looked at him, at the hope in his eyes, she found she didn't care what people thought. "I'd love to." Saturday dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for a long ride. Flynn arrived at dawn with 2 horses, a pack with food and supplies, and that easy smile that made Zelda's heart skip. She dressed practically in a split skirt she'd sewn herself, scandalous by Boston standards, but necessary for serious riding. They rode north out of Kingman, into hills covered with juniper and pinyon pine. The air smelled different here, crisp and clean, carrying the scent of sage and sun-warmed rock. Flynn led them along trails that seemed invisible to Zelda's untrained eye, moving with the confidence of someone who knew every stone and tree. After 2 hours, they emerged into a hidden valley. A small stream ran through the center, fed by a spring that bubbled up from between the rocks. Cottonwood trees provided shade and wildflowers dotted the grass. It was the most beautiful place Zelda had ever seen. "This is mine," Flynn said quietly. "Well, technically it belongs to the territory, but I'm the only one who comes here. I found it my first month in Arizona and thought it was the perfect spot for a house someday. It's incredible." Zelda dismounted, her legs aching from the long ride. "Why would you build your ranch where it is when you could build here?" Water rights. "The spring isn't reliable enough for cattle. But I always thought it might be nice for a family home, somewhere peaceful, away from the dust and heat." He dismounted and began unpacking the saddlebags. "Thought you might like to see it." They spread a blanket near the stream and ate the lunch misses. Chen had packed cold chicken and fresh bread and apples from a tree she somehow kept alive in the desert heat. Zelda lay back on the blanket, staring up at the impossibly blue sky through the cottonwood branches. "I never knew places like this existed," she said. "In Boston, everything is buildings and smoke and people everywhere. Even the parks are designed and controlled. This is wild." "Do you like it?" Flynn asked. "The wildness, I mean. Or do you wish for more civilization?" Zelda thought about it honestly. "A month ago, I would have said I missed civilization. But now, I think I prefer this. Everything here is real. People say what they mean. The land doesn't pretend to be anything but what it is. There's something liberating about that." Flynn shifted closer, propping himself up on one elbow to look at her. "I'm glad you feel that way. I was worried you might get tired of frontier life and want to go back east." "There's nothing for me back east." Zelda met his eyes. "Everything I want is here." The air between them grew charged with unspoken meaning. Flynn reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "Zelda, I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered in her chest. "What?" "I wasn't completely honest about why I wanted to show you this place. I mean, yes, it's beautiful and peaceful. But mainly I wanted you to see it because I've been thinking about building that house, and I keep imagining what it would be like if you were there with me." Zelda's breath caught. "Flynn, we've only known each other a month. I know. And if you think I'm crazy, just say so and we'll ride back to town and never speak of this again. But I've never felt like this before, Zelda. When I'm with you, everything makes sense. When I'm not, I'm counting the hours until I can see you again. I know it's fast, but out here, life is too short to waste time on maybes." Zelda sat up, her mind racing. Everything he was saying echoed her own feelings, thoughts she'd been afraid to acknowledge even to herself. She cared for Flynn in a way that terrified her with its intensity. But was she ready for this? Was she brave enough? "I feel the same way," she said quietly. "You scare me, Flynn Morrison, because I look at you and I see everything I didn't know I wanted, but I'm also terrified. My last relationship ended badly. My father's death taught me how quickly everything can fall apart. What if this is just loneliness and proximity? What if we're making a mistake? What if we're not?" Flynn countered. He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "What if this is exactly what it feels like? What if we're both finally finding what we've been looking for? I don't want to be someone you rescue, Flynn. I'm not some damsel who needs saving. I came to Arizona to build my own life, not to become someone's wife and give up my independence. I don't want to rescue you. I want to be your partner, your equal. I'd never ask you to give up teaching or your independence. I'm just asking if maybe we could build something together, side by side." Zelda looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. He was watching her with such openness, such vulnerability that it made her chest ache. She thought about the past month, about every conversation and shared moment, about how right it felt to be with him. "I think," she said slowly, "that I'd like to try. Building something together, I mean. But slowly. I'm not ready to make any promises I'm not sure I can keep." Flynn smiled, and it was like sunrise breaking over the desert. "Slow is fine. We've got all the time in the world." He leaned in slowly, telegraphing his intention, and Zelda closed the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they pulled apart, Zelda was smiling. "That was nice," she said, then laughed at the understatement. "Real nice," Flynn agreed, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. They stayed in the hidden valley until late afternoon, talking about their hopes for the future, the practical realities of frontier life, what partnership might look like between them. Flynn was adamant that Zelda should keep teaching as long as she wanted, that her work mattered just as much as his. Zelda felt herself falling harder with every word. The ride back to Kingman was slower, both of them reluctant to let the day end. By the time they reached town, the sun was setting in shades of orange and pink. Flynn walked Zelda to her cottage door, very aware of the curious eyes watching from windows up and down the street. "Thank you for today," Zelda said. "It was perfect. We'll do it again soon." Flynn hesitated, then leaned in to kiss her again, quick and sweet. "See you tomorrow at church. You will." Over the following weeks, Zelda and Flynn's courtship became the talk of Kingman. They were seen together constantly, riding out on weekends, sharing meals at the hotel restaurant, sitting together at church. Some of the townspeople approved, seeing them as a good match. Others whispered that the schoolteacher was moving too fast, that she should be more circumspect. Zelda found she didn't care much about the gossip. For the first time in her life, she was happy. Teaching filled her days with purpose, and Flynn filled her evenings with joy. He helped her haul water when her shoulder was sore, fixed the cottage door when it stuck, brought her books from Prescott when he went to sell cattle. She mended his shirts, taught him to read music when he expressed curiosity, listened to his worries about the ranch. They were building something real piece by piece. In late August, nearly 3 months after Zelda had arrived in Kingman, Flynn showed up at the schoolhouse after classes had ended. He looked nervous, turning his hat in his hands. "I have to go to Santa Fe for supplies," he said. "I'll be gone about 2 weeks. The ranch will be fine with my hands watching it, but I wanted to tell you myself." 2 weeks seemed like an eternity. Zelda felt foolish for her disappointment. "Of course, thank you for telling me. I'm going to miss you." Flynn stepped closer. "These past few months have been the best of my life, Zelda. I need you to know that." "I know. They've been wonderful for me, too." "When I get back, can we talk? About the future, I mean. About making this permanent." Zelda's heart leaped. "Yes, when you get back, we'll talk." He kissed her goodbye, a long, sweet kiss that made her forget they were standing in the schoolhouse where any student or parent could walk in. When he finally pulled away, they were both breathless. 2 weeks, Flynn said. "Then we'll figure out the rest of our lives." He left the next morning before dawn, and Kingman felt emptier without him. Zelda threw herself into teaching, preparing the students for their fall examinations. The days passed slowly, each one bringing Flynn closer to home. On the 10th day, a stranger rode into town. Zelda was walking from the schoolhouse to her cottage when she saw him, a well-dressed man on a fine horse, asking questions at the hotel. Something about him made her uneasy, though she couldn't say why. She hurried home and locked her door, feeling foolish but unable to shake her discomfort. The knock came an hour later. Zelda knew who it was before she opened the door. The man was in his 40s, with slicked hair and expensive clothes that were out of place in Kingman. He smiled when he saw her, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Sinclair, what a pleasure to finally find you. Your father's associates have been quite worried about you." Zelda's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do. Mr. Carver sent me to collect the $200 your father borrowed, plus interest, of course. It's been nearly 4 months now, so we'll call it 250. I don't have that kind of money. Then we'll have to make other arrangements, won't we?" His smile grew sharper. "There are establishments in Santa Fe that would pay quite well for a pretty girl like you. I'm sure we could work off your debt in, 6 months or so." Zelda felt sick. She tried to close the door, but he blocked it with his foot. "Get out." Now, no need for rudeness. You have 2 options, Miss Sinclair. Come with me voluntarily, or I'll go to the sheriff and explain that you're a fugitive debtor. Either way, you're leaving Kingman. The sheriff won't help you force me into prostitution. Won't he? You'd be surprised what men will overlook when money's involved. Besides, I'm not talking about prostitution. I'm talking about honest work to repay an honest debt. What you do in Santa Fe is between you and your employer." He leaned against the doorframe. "I'll give you until tomorrow to decide. Think carefully, Miss Sinclair. This can go easy or hard, but either way, debts must be paid." He left, and Zelda immediately went to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Cooper listened to her story, his expression grave. "You actually owe this money?" he asked. "My father borrowed it, yes. But I had nothing to do with the transaction. Legally, if your father's dead and you're his only heir, the debt passes to you." Cooper rubbed his weathered face. "I can't arrest him for trying to collect what's owed, Miss Sinclair. Best I can do is make sure he doesn't threaten you directly." "So you're saying I have to pay or leave?" "I'm saying the law's not on your side here. If you had the money, I'd advise paying it just to be done with him. If you don't, well, you might want to consider moving on before this gets uglier." Zelda left the sheriff's office feeling hopeless. She had maybe $30 saved from her teaching salary. Flynn had money, she knew, but he was 5 days away in Santa Fe and she had no way to contact him. She couldn't ask the townspeople for help with such a large sum. She was trapped. That night, she sat at her small table with the journal Flynn had given her and wrote him a long letter. She explained everything about her father's debts, about the man who'd come to collect, about her impossible situation. She told him how much their time together had meant to her. And she told him she was leaving before things got worse, heading west to California where she might start over again. It was the hardest letter she'd ever written. But she couldn't drag Flynn into her mess, couldn't let him throw away his hard-earned money on her father's mistakes. And she couldn't bear the thought of him seeing her dragged away to Santa Fe in shame. She left the letter with the hotel clerk, with instructions to give it to Flynn when he returned. Then she packed her few belongings and waited for dawn. The plan was to take the morning stage to Prescott, then buy passage on a freight wagon heading to California. She'd use every penny she had and trust that she could find work when she arrived. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all she had. At 5 in the morning, she walked to the stage office with her trunk. The clerk was just opening up, yawning and rubbing his eyes. "Help you, miss. I need passage to Prescott on the first stage. That'll be leaving in about an hour. Cost you $8. Zelda paid, wincing at how much of her savings disappeared. She sat on a bench outside the office, watching the town wake up around her. She'd only been in Kingman for 4 months, but it had started to feel like home. Leaving felt like tearing out a piece of her heart. The stranger appeared as the stage was being loaded. "Running away, Miss Sinclair. That's not very honorable. I'm not running. I'm leaving on my own terms." "To go where? With what money? You're only delaying the inevitable." He sat beside her too close. "Come to Santa Fe with me. Work off the debt properly. I promise the establishment I have in mind is quite refined, better than whatever you'll find on the streets of San Francisco when your money runs out. I'd rather die. That can be arranged too." His voice was pleasant, conversational, which somehow made the threat worse. "My employer doesn't like to be defied, Miss Sinclair. If you run, he'll keep sending people until someone brings you back. Is that really how you want to live? Always looking over your shoulder?" Zelda realized with cold clarity that he was right. She could run to California or Oregon or Montana, but the debt would follow her. These men wouldn't give up. She'd never be free. "How much time do I have to get the money together?" she asked quietly. 2 weeks. "If you have the full amount by then, we'll consider the matter settled. If not, you come back east with me." It was impossible. She couldn't raise $250 in 2 weeks, but at least it bought her time to think. "Fine. 2 weeks. Excellent." He stood, tipping his hat. "I'll be staying at the hotel. Do let me know if you need anything, Miss Sinclair. I can be quite helpful when people cooperate." He walked away, and Zelda felt the weight of defeat pressing down on her. She couldn't get on the stage now, not with the threat hanging over her. She couldn't run if it meant spending the rest of her life hunted. She retrieved her trunk and trudged back to the cottage, feeling hollow. Kate from the saloon found her there an hour later, sitting at the table staring at nothing. "Heard you had some trouble," Kate said, letting herself in uninvited. "Want to talk about it?" Zelda was too tired to pretend. She told Kate everything, the whole sordid story. Kate listened without judgment, then sat back and lit a slim cigar. "Men like that are parasites," Kate said. "They prey on women with no protection, no choices. I dealt with plenty of them back when I was working in Denver." She blew out a stream of smoke. "How much do you need?" $250. "I know it's impossible." "It's not impossible, it's just a lot of money." Kate thought for a moment. "I might have about 50 in my safe, And I bet if we asked around town, folks would chip in. People like you, Zelda. You're good for this town. I can't ask people for charity. It's not charity, it's community. That's what we do out here. We take care of our own. Kate stood. Let me make some inquiries, and when Flynn gets back, you tell him everything. That man's crazy about you. He'll move heaven and earth to help. I can't ask him to pay my father's debts. Then don't ask. Let him offer. But don't make decisions for him, Zelda. That's not fair to either of you. After Kate left, Zelda felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. Over the next 3 days, that spark grew into a flame. Kate organized a collection, framing it as a loan that Zelda could pay back over time. The townspeople responded with surprising generosity. Mrs. Patterson donated $10. The Wheelers gave $5. Even Sheriff Cooper contributed $3 from his modest salary. By the time Flynn rode back into town a week later, they'd raised $135. It wasn't enough, but it was more than Zelda had dared hope for. Flynn came straight to the schoolhouse, arriving just as classes were ending. The students scattered, giggling at the cowboy who'd come for their teacher. Flynn swept Zelda up in his arms, spinning her around, and she forgot everything else for a moment in the pure joy of having him back. "I missed you," he said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. 2 weeks felt like 2 years. "I missed you too." Zelda pulled back to look at him. "Flynn, we need to talk. Something's happened." His expression shifted to concern. "What's wrong?" They sat on the schoolhouse steps and Zelda told him everything. Flynn listened in silence, his jaw getting tighter with each word. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "How much did the town raise?" he asked finally. $135. "Kate thinks we might get another 20 or 30 if we try, but that still leaves us short." "I have the rest," Flynn said simply. "I've got about 300 in the bank in Prescott from the cattle sale. I'll wire for it tomorrow." "Flynn, no, that's your money. You've worked so hard for it." "And what good is it if you're not here?" He took her hands. "Zelda, I love you. I was planning to say it more romantically, probably with flowers or something, but there it is. I love you. And I'm not going to let some bastard from Boston drag you away over money." Tears sprang to Zelda's eyes. "I love you too. God help me, I do. But I can't let you throw away your savings on my problems." "It's not throwing away anything. It's an investment in our future." "Because you are my future, Zelda, if you'll have me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I bought this in Santa Fe. Was going to wait for the perfect moment, but I guess this is it. Zelda Sinclair, will you marry me?" The ring was simple. A silver band with a small turquoise stone, and it was the most beautiful thing Zelda had ever seen. She was crying in earnest now, torn between joy and guilt. "Why would you choose me?" she asked through her tears. "I've brought you nothing but trouble. I'm in debt, I'm being threatened by criminals, and I'll probably bring more problems down on you." "Why would you want that?" Flynn cupped her face in his hands, his blue eyes intense. "Because you're my everything. You're brave and smart and kind. You make me laugh. You challenge me to be better. When I think about the rest of my life, I can't imagine it without you in it. Every day, every moment. So yes, I'll pay off your debt. Yes, I'll face down any man who threatens you. I'll do whatever it takes, Zelda, because loving you isn't a burden. It's the greatest gift I've ever been given." Zelda kissed him, pouring every ounce of love and gratitude into it. When they finally broke apart, she was smiling through her tears. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." Flynn slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. They sat on the steps holding each other as the sun set, making plans. They would pay off the debt together, combining the money the town had raised with Flynn's savings. They would marry as soon as possible, presenting a united front. And they would build the life they'd dreamed of, side by side. The next day, Flynn withdrew his money, and they went together to meet the stranger at the hotel. Flynn carried his rifle, making it clear that any trouble would be met with force. They counted out $250 in gold and silver coins, demanding a receipt that acknowledged the debt as paid in full. The stranger looked between them, clearly disappointed at being deprived of his prize, but he took the money and provided the receipt. "Pleasure doing business with you, Miss Sinclair. Or I suppose it'll be Mrs. Morrison soon." "That's none of your concern," Flynn said coldly. "You got your money. Now get on your horse and ride out of town. If I see you again, I won't be as friendly." The man left that afternoon, and Zelda felt like she could breathe freely for the first time in weeks. The weight that had been pressing down on her lifted, replaced by lightness and hope. They married a week later in the small white church, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Zelda wore a simple blue dress that Kate had helped her sew, and Flynn wore his best suit. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Flynn kissed her so thoroughly that several people laughed and applauded. The town threw them a celebration at the saloon, with music and dancing and more food than Zelda had seen in months. People came up throughout the evening to congratulate them and offer advice, most of it contradictory. Kate gave Zelda a bottle of whiskey for medicinal purposes and told her to never go to bed angry. Mrs. Chen presented them with a beautiful quilt she'd sewn, covered in intricate patterns. Even Sheriff Cooper showed up, shaking Flynn's hand and telling him he'd married way above his station. As the evening wound down, Flynn and Zelda slipped away to the ranch. They decided to live there rather than in town, with Zelda riding in each day for school. It was a compromise that satisfied them both, giving Zelda the independence of her work while providing them both with the privacy of their own home. The ranch house was dark and quiet, Scout greeting them with enthusiastic tail wags. Flynn lit a lamp in the bedroom, and suddenly, Zelda felt nervous. They'd kissed plenty over the past months, but this was different. This was forever. "Are you scared?" Flynn asked, seeming to sense her anxiety. "A little," Zelda admitted. "Not of you, just of everything being different now. It doesn't have to be that different. We're still us. Just together officially now." He pulled her close. "We'll figure it out as we go, same as everything else. There's no rush, Zelda. We've got the rest of our lives." His patience and understanding dissolved her nervousness. This was Flynn, the man who'd rescued her, supported her, loved her through everything. There was nothing to fear. Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, two people learning each other in the most intimate way possible. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the dark, listening to the desert night sounds through the open window. "I can't believe this is real," Zelda whispered. 4 months ago, I was running away from Boston with nothing. Now I have a husband, a home, a career I love. It feels like a dream." "If it's a dream, I don't want to wake up." Flynn pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Zelda Morrison." "That'll take some getting used to, Zelda Morrison." She smiled in the darkness. "But I like how it sounds." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, beginning their new life together. The next months fell into a comfortable pattern. Zelda taught Monday through Friday, riding to town each morning on the gentle mare Flynn had given her as a wedding present. She'd named the horse Sage, and they'd developed an easy partnership. Flynn worked the ranch, tending his growing herd and making improvements to the property. In the evenings, they'd have dinner together, talking about their days, making plans for the future. On weekends, they explored the country around Kingman. Flynn showed Zelda hidden canyons and ancient ruins, taught her to fish in the streams that ran briefly after summer storms, pointed out animal tracks and explained what they meant. Zelda absorbed it all eagerly, falling more in love with this wild country every day. In October, Zelda realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks but waited until she was certain before telling Flynn. She chose a Saturday evening when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, one of their favorite times. "I have something to tell you," she said, her hand unconsciously going to her still flat stomach. Flynn turned to her with concern. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." "Everything's right, actually," she smiled. "We're going to have a baby in late spring, I think." For a moment, Flynn just stared at her. Then a grin spread across his face, wider than she'd ever seen. "A baby, are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. But yes, I'm sure." Flynn pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "This is incredible. We're going to be parents. You're going to be a mother. And you're going to be a father. Are you ready for that?" "I have no idea, but I can't wait to find out." He pulled back to look at her. "How are you feeling? Are you sick? Should you stop teaching? What do you need?" Zelda laughed at his sudden anxiety. "I'm fine. A little tired, but fine. And I'm not stopping teaching. Women have babies and keep working, Flynn. I'm pregnant, not fragile." Over the following months, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Flynn built a cradle from cottonwood wood, carefully sanding every surface until it was smooth as silk. Mrs. Chen helped Zelda sew tiny clothes and blankets. The town celebrated the coming addition, with various women offering advice that ranged from helpful to terrifying. Zelda continued teaching until March, when her pregnancy made riding into town too uncomfortable. The townspeople understood, and several of the older students took turns leading the classes under her guidance until they could hire a temporary teacher for the last month of school. In late April, on a warm evening with stars blazing overhead, Zelda went into labor. Flynn rode for the doctor, a frantic midnight gallop that he'd later describe as the longest 20 minutes of his life. Mrs. Chen stayed with Zelda, her calm presence reassuring even when the pain became overwhelming. The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the night and into the next day. Flynn wore a path in the floorboards with his pacing, unable to do anything but wait and worry. When he heard the baby's first cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. Dr. Patterson emerged from the bedroom looking exhausted but smiling. "Congratulations, Morrison. You have a son." "A son." Flynn went into the bedroom on shaking legs and found Zelda propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of Mrs. Chen's quilts. She looked up when he entered, tears streaming down her face. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Flynn sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had dark hair like his mother and was currently scrunched up like he was deeply unhappy about being born. But to Flynn, he was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "What should we name him?" Zelda asked. They discussed names for months but never settled on anything. Now, looking at his son, Flynn knew exactly what felt right. "How about James, after your father?" Zelda's eyes filled with fresh tears. Despite everything, despite the debts and the trouble, she'd loved her father. "James Flynn Morrison. It's perfect." Little James proved to be a demanding baby, crying at all hours and refusing to sleep for more than an hour or two at a stretch. Flynn and Zelda took turns walking him around the house, exhausted but happy. Mrs. Chen moved into the spare room temporarily, helping with cooking and cleaning so Zelda could focus on recovering and feeding the baby. In June, Zelda returned to teaching part-time, bringing James with her. She'd nurse him during lunch breaks and keep him in a basket near her desk while she taught. The students were fascinated by the baby, and the older girls fought over who got to hold him during recess. Life settled into a new normal, busier and louder than before, but full of joy. Flynn proved to be a natural father, completely unafraid of diapers or spit up. He talked to James constantly, explaining about ranching and horses, reading to him from the newspaper even though the baby clearly had no idea what he was saying. When James was 6 months old, they took him to visit the Hidden Valley, the place where Flynn had first proposed. They spread a blanket near the stream and watched James try to catch butterflies, his chubby hands grasping at air. "You ever regret it?" Flynn asked, lying back with his hands behind his head. "Giving up the quiet life of teaching for all this chaos?" Zelda looked at him, then at their son, then at the beautiful valley surrounding them. "Not even for a second. This is everything I didn't know I needed. You and James and this wild country. I wouldn't trade it for anything." "Good. Because I was thinking we might need a bigger house soon. Maybe start building up here like I always planned." "Are you suggesting we need more space because you're planning on more children, Mr. Morrison?" "I'm saying James might like a brother or sister someday. No rush, but it's something to think about." Zelda smiled. "It's definitely something to think about." They did build the house eventually, starting when James was 2 and finishing just before their daughter Sarah was born. It was a beautiful home, built from local stone and timber, with a wide porch that overlooked the valley and enough bedrooms for a growing family. They kept the original ranch house for the foreman and ranch hands who came to work for Flynn as his operation expanded. Over the years, the family grew. After Sarah came twin boys, Robert and William, who kept everyone on their toes with their endless energy and creativity. Then, when Zelda was 35 and thought they were done having children, she found herself pregnant one last time with a daughter they named Alina. The children grew up wild and free, learning to ride almost before they could walk, attending school in town but spending their evenings exploring the land they called home. James showed an early interest in ranching and spent every spare moment following his father around. Sarah proved to be a brilliant student with a gift for mathematics that astounded the teachers. The twins were inseparable troublemakers who somehow always managed to look innocent. And Alina, the baby, was gentle and artistic, filling the house with drawings and songs. Zelda continued teaching, becoming a beloved figure in Kingman. She taught children who grew up to be ranchers, miners, shopkeepers, and one who became a lawyer in Phoenix. She started a lending library in the schoolhouse and pushed the town council to invest in better educational materials. Flynn served on the school board, supporting Zelda's initiatives and working to ensure that all children in the area had access to education. The ranch prospered as well. Flynn's reputation for honest dealing and quality cattle spread, and he was able to expand his holdings. He hired fairly, paying decent wages and treating his workers with respect. Several of his ranch hands became partners, buying their own spreads nearby. The area around the ranch became a small community, with families building homes and helping each other through the challenges of frontier life. On their 10th anniversary, Flynn took Zelda back to the spot where they'd first met, on the road outside Kingman. They stood looking at the desert stretching endlessly in all directions. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Flynn asked. "When I rode up, and you were trying so hard to control that horse. I remember thinking you were the most capable person I'd ever seen," Zelda said with a laugh, "and feeling completely out of my depth. You said you needed help, that the driver was injured and you didn't know what to do." Flynn turned to face her. "But even then, even scared and lost, you were strong. You got on that horse even though you didn't know how to ride. You stayed with that driver even though you could have run. You were always brave, Zelda. I just helped you see it. You did more than that. You gave me a life I never imagined possible. A family, a home, a purpose. You saw me when I felt invisible." "Why would you choose me?" Flynn quoted back to her, words from a conversation long ago. That's what you asked once. Remember what I said, because I'm your everything. And you are. Every single day. Every moment. You're my everything, Zelda Morrison. She kissed him there in the desert sunlight, just as she had 100 times before and would 1,000 times more. Around them, the wild country stretched vast and beautiful, but all that mattered was this, the two of them together, choosing each other over and over again. The years continued to pass, bringing joy and challenges in equal measure. There were droughts that tested Flynn's skills as a rancher, forced him to dig deeper wells and experiment with new grazing patterns. There were illnesses, childhood accidents, teenage rebellions. James got thrown from a horse at 16 and broke his arm badly. Sarah fell in love with a boy from town that Zelda didn't initially approve of until she got to know him better. The twins nearly burned down the barn experimenting with a chemistry set. Alina struggled with shyness that made school difficult until Zelda worked patiently to help her find her voice. Through it all, Flynn and Zelda faced each obstacle together. They'd learned early in their marriage that communication was essential, that going to bed angry was poison, that supporting each other's dreams made them both stronger. They still had disagreements, sometimes heated ones, but they'd made a commitment to always remember why they'd chosen each other in the first place. When James turned 18, he asked his father for a piece of land to start his own small ranch. Flynn had been preparing for this, had set aside a parcel specifically for this purpose. They worked together to build James's house, the whole family pitching in. On the day James moved into his own place, Zelda cried, mourning the end of her baby's childhood even as she celebrated the capable man he'd become. Sarah shocked everyone by announcing at 17 that she didn't want to marry her boyfriend right away, that she wanted to go to college in California to study mathematics. It was nearly unheard of for a woman, especially one from a frontier town, but Zelda and Flynn supported her dream. They'd saved money for years, preparing for their children's futures, and they used it to send Sarah west. She'd write long letters home, full of excitement about her studies and the wider world she was discovering. The twins ended up in different directions despite their closeness. Robert followed his father and brother into ranching, while William discovered a talent for carpentry and became an apprentice to the town's builder. Alina, gentle Alina, surprised everyone by becoming a teacher like her mother, starting at the Kingman School when she was just 19. As the children grew and made their own lives, Flynn and Zelda found themselves with more time together. They took long rides into the desert, revisiting all their favorite places. They sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the stars, talking about everything and nothing. Flynn's hair was graying now, and Zelda had lines around her eyes from years of smiling, but they were still deeply in love. On their 20th anniversary, the children threw them a party. The whole town came, cramming into the ranch house and spilling out onto the porch and yard. There was music and dancing, and someone convinced Flynn and Zelda to tell the story of how they met. They stood together in front of the crowd, finishing each other's sentences, laughing at the memories. "I thought she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen," Flynn said, his arm around Zelda's waist. "Sitting there on that horse looking terrified but determined, I knew right then I was in trouble. And I thought he was going to think I was completely incompetent," Zelda added. "Which I was, at least at frontier living. But he never made me feel foolish for not knowing things. He just taught me." "Best decision I ever made," Flynn said, pulling her close. "Riding up to help a stranger on the road changed my whole life." James stood and raised his glass. "To my parents, who taught us that love isn't just a feeling but a choice you make every day. May we all be lucky enough to find what you have." The crowd cheered and drank, and Zelda felt her eyes fill with tears. She looked around at her children, at her friends and neighbors, at the life she'd built in this place that had once seemed so foreign. She thought about that scared girl on the road from Boston, running from her past with no idea what her future held. If she could go back and tell that girl what was waiting for her here in the Arizona desert, she wouldn't believe it. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the children had left for their own places, Flynn and Zelda sat on their porch swing watching the stars. Scout the second, grandson of the original Scout, slept at their feet. The desert was quiet except for the occasional call of a coyote in the distance. 20 years, Zelda said softly. It doesn't feel that long. No, it doesn't. Flynn pulled her closer. But look at everything we've done. 5 incredible children. A successful ranch. You've taught hundreds of students. We've built a real life here, Zelda. Something that matters. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't ridden up that day? If you'd gone a different direction or left earlier or later? All the time. And every time I do, I thank God I was exactly where I needed to be, exactly when I needed to be there. He kissed the top of her head. You were meant to be here, Zelda, in this place, in this life, with me. I was, she agreed. I just didn't know it until I met you. They sat in comfortable silence, rocking gently, thinking about the past and dreaming about the future. There were grandchildren to look forward to, James's wedding planned for next spring, Sarah talking about coming home after she finished her studies. The ranch was thriving, the children were happy and healthy, and they had each other. As the years continued, Flynn and Zelda watched their family grow in ways they'd never imagined. James married a sweet girl from Prescott and started filling his ranch with children of his own. Sarah came home from California with a degree and a husband, a mathematics professor who'd fallen in love with her brilliance and spirit. She started teaching advanced mathematics at the school in Kingman, becoming the first female mathematics teacher in the territory. The twins both married, Robert to his childhood sweetheart and William to a girl he met while building a house in Prescott. Eleanor married her fellow teacher, a young man from back east who'd come to Arizona for adventure and found love instead. Within a few years, Flynn and Zelda had more grandchildren than they could count, with more arriving regularly. The ranch became a gathering place for the extended family. Every Sunday after church, children and grandchildren would descend on the house, filling it with noise and laughter. Flynn and Zelda loved the chaos, even when it left them exhausted. They'd sit on the porch after everyone left, picking up scattered toys and remembering when their own children had been small. On their 30th anniversary, the family held another celebration. This time there were grandchildren running everywhere, the oldest nearly 10 and the youngest just a few months old. Zelda looked around at the crowd, at the faces that shared her features and Flynn's, and felt overwhelming gratitude. "We did good," Flynn said, seeming to read her thoughts. "Look at all this. All these lives that exist because you got on that stagecoach and I happened to be riding that road. We did better than good," Zelda said. "We created something beautiful." As they entered their 40s and then their 50s, Flynn and Zelda slowed down but never stopped. Flynn handed over more of the ranch operations to James and Robert, but still rode out every day to check on things. Zelda retired from teaching at 55, passing the schoolhouse to Eleanor, but continued tutoring students who struggled. They took up new hobbies together. Zelda taught Flynn to play chess, and they'd spend hours locked in strategic battle. Flynn taught Zelda to shoot properly, and she proved to be a natural marksman. They both read voraciously, sharing books and discussing them late into the night. When Flynn turned 60, A milestone Zelda celebrated with a large party. He gave a speech that had everyone in tears. "I've lived a good long life," he said, standing with Zelda's hand in his. "I've seen war and peace, poverty and prosperity. I've built something with my own hands and watched it grow beyond my wildest dreams. But none of it, not one single bit of it, matters compared to this woman standing beside me." He turned to face Zelda directly. 35 years ago, I rode up to a broken stagecoach and found my whole world sitting on a horse, looking scared but determined. I've gotten to spend more than half my life watching her grow and change, watching her become an even more incredible person than the one I fell in love with. If I died tomorrow, I'd die the happiest man alive because I got to love Zelda Sinclair, and miraculously, she chose to love me back. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. Zelda pulled Flynn close and kissed him, not caring who was watching. "Best 35 years of my life," she whispered. "And I'm planning on at least 35 more." They didn't get quite that long, but they came close. Flynn passed away peacefully in his sleep at 82, Zelda beside him holding his hand. He'd lived a full, rich life, surrounded by family, respected by his community, deeply loved. His funeral was the largest Kingman had ever seen, with people coming from all over the territory to pay their respects to a man who'd been unfailingly honest, generous, and kind. Zelda grieved deeply, but she didn't break. She'd had 50 years with the love of her life, years filled with more joy than most people experienced in 2 lifetimes. She stayed on the ranch, helped by her children and grandchildren, telling stories about Flynn and keeping his memory alive. She lived another 8 years, watching her grandchildren have children of their own, becoming a great-grandmother many times over. She watched the territory become a state, watched Kingman grow from a small mining town into a thriving city. She watched the world change, bringing automobiles and electricity and countless other wonders. But the thing she treasured most was the family she and Flynn had created, the legacy of love they'd left behind. On quiet evenings, she'd sit on the porch with her journal, the one Flynn had given her so many years ago, and write down memories. She wanted the future generations to know the story, to understand how their family had started with a broken stagecoach and a cowboy who'd been in the right place at the right time. In her final entry, written just days before she died peacefully in her sleep at 90, she wrote, "If someone had told that scared girl on the road from Boston what her life would become, she wouldn't have believed it. But Flynn showed me that home isn't a place, it's a person. It's choosing each other every day through the good and the bad. It's building something together, brick by brick, moment by moment. He asked me once why I'd choose him, and I gave him all sorts of practical reasons. But the truth is simpler than that. I chose him because my soul recognized his. Because in all the world, in all of time, he was the one meant for me. And I'd choose him again in every life, in every world, forever and always." When they found her, the journal was open to that page and she had a peaceful smile on her face. They buried her next to Flynn on a hill overlooking the valley they'd loved, under the endless Arizona sky. And if you visit that spot today, you can still see the stone markers, weathered now but standing strong, side by side for eternity. The Morrison family still runs that ranch, generation after generation, telling the story of Zelda and Flynn to their children. They talk about how sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes, how a broken stagecoach wheel can change your whole life, how love can bloom in the harshest deserts. They remember that courage isn't the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it. And they never forget the most important lesson their ancestors taught them, that when you find someone who sees you, really sees you, you hold on tight and never let go. Because some people are just meant to find each other, whether it's on a dusty road in the Arizona Territory in 1878 or anywhere else in the wide world. And when they do, when two souls recognize each other across the distance, that's when the real adventure begins. That's when everything becomes possible. That's when you learn that home is wherever the person you love is standing, and that sometimes the best answer to "why would you choose me?" is simply, "because you're my everything." The end.